Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to another episode of 5 Influential Horror, a series where I talk to all kinds of horror fans about their 5 most influential horror movies and why they picked them. And today, for the first time, but probably long overdue at this point, is Mike and Serial, who we sort of bonded, I think, over found footage on Twitter, and then even insanely loving and supporting towards us, and we greatly appreciate it. So I was like, gotta get you on to talk your influential horror. So thanks for coming on. I'm excited to have you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of you guys already. I flew through Found Footage Fridays because it was so entertaining.
You went through them so crazy fast. Yeah. That's great, though. And it was so cool to see because, like, talking about a lot of people, I feel like, that do like found footage, you can usually get a little bit of banter online, but like it was cool to kind of revisit some of those and talk about them and see you talk about them and your opinions on them, or like if it was one you hadn't seen or you wanted to revisit. I'm like always welcoming conversations about found footage. So it was really cool as you were kind of going along. I got to kind of like go back through them and it was awesome. So thanks for doing that. It was cool.
No problem.
But yeah, so we're here to talk your 5 influential horror movies. And I always do this. I typically try to look at them and go, okay, how many of these have actually been on here before? So I think 3 of your 5 have been on here before, but 2 of them have not. And that's always really cool when that happens because I've been doing influential horror for like 2 years or something like that. So
nice.
3 years.
I'm excited to see which ones they are.
Yeah, well, one of them is your first one.
Okay, awesome.
So your first one is The Omen, the original The Omen.
Yeah, so The Omen is probably the most influential. One of the movies on here is like the first horror film I ever saw.
Okay.
But this one, I kind of celebrate this one as the movie that probably made me fall in love with horror without knowing it.
Okay.
So my first horror experience was actually with it at 5 years old, but I was 5, so I don't remember all of it. And
sure.
It was definitely not influential because it was scary as heck to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
But my dad, which is funny because he's not a horror fan no more,
Okay.
but he made my sister and I watch this movie probably starting when I was 8 years old. Like we watched it monthly. I've seen this movie so many times at such a young age.
Yeah.
And it scared me a lot.
Yeah.
But when I think about myself as a horror fan, I really look back at this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he did that because I think we notice as time goes on,
Yeah.
when you start watching horror, it kind of changes what you view horror as. So like if someone if there's a 13-year-old who got into horror now and they're watching the movies that came out now, I don't think they're going to have the same appreciation for The Exorcist, The Omen.
No, for sure.
So I was really excited that my dad got me hooked on this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize how much I loved it until I looked back and said, like, I was scared of it, but I always went down to the basement to watch this movie still. As much as it scared me, I was like, still there. So I really think I would not be the horror fan that I am today without this movie.
Without The Omen. That's crazy. I love that horror fans always have something that they watched before they were really old enough to watch it. Like all of us pretty much come from like this like, yeah, we watched this. We were like 4 or 5 or 6. And it's like, I don't know very many like diehard horror fans that like, there's a few probably, I'm sure, but typically it is that, we started way too early. So
yeah, I think I hear that all the time too. Anytime you ask someone, they're like, well, it all started at 5. And people are like, what do you mean at 5? I was like, ask 20 horror fans, 18 of them are going to say the same thing.
100%.
Under the age of 10. Under the age of 10.
Under the age of, no, you're absolutely right. Because my first memory of life is the movie Poltergeist. I saw it when I was either 4. I had to have been about the same age, either 4 or 5, because I remember, even though I know I don't remember the entire experience from beginning to end, I remember my siblings getting in trouble for letting me watch it, and I remember sitting in front of the TV and being scared of it. So yeah, you're exactly right. There's always going to be a majority of horror fans that are like, yeah, I saw this movie when I was like way too young to have seen it. And it's so funny to me because like I have a 6-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old that are all very different in personalities, but like the 11-year-old and the 6-year-old are into horror. And so like I just introduced the 11-year-old to Scream, but he, to your point about what you said, won't watch the original because it looks old. So we started at 5, which is fine, I guess. But it's, to your point, you're right. Like if it's different getting people into stuff when they start with the more recent things, it's a lot harder to go backwards. So
it does, because if you're, he's not wrong. As much as I love Scream, and it doesn't look old to me
either, right?
But I saw it in theater, so it doesn't look old to me. But if I ask my younger cousin who's now getting into horror, they're gonna be like, oh, like that's really old. And I'm just gonna sit there like, no.
Stop it. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So yeah, to your point. But yeah, everybody always, I love the stories of people like that are like, oh yeah, I was like this age when I started watching this. And you're thinking like it's awful, but I also have the same story. So I have like no way to judge anyway. So The Omen has not been on here before, which now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of crazy actually, because it's like a classic. So that's, insane. I love that though. I love it when it's something that I haven't had a chance to talk about first, especially for it to be the one that kind of, when you look back, you're like, this is the one that made me love this genre. So your second one is actually one of my influential movies. I don't know if you knew that or not about me, but your second one is Scream.
I think I did know that because I had to like also think, because I was like, I think I know what some of yours were. And I was like, I feel like my influential ones are going to overlap with yours a lot.
Yeah. Two of your five. Yeah.
But this one is the one that I was alluding to. This is the one that this is my first major movie or horror movie experience that I remember. The whole
was seeing Scream. Okay.
Yeah. So my father, who is not a horror fan, took me. This movie came out when I was 7. And I went to the theater. We went to the Dollar Theater at the time. And now I do feel like it's sounding very old.
Hey, I used to go to Dollar Theaters too.
Because like Dollar Theater, I don't think anybody's ever heard of that anymore.
No, they don't exist really.
So we went there and we saw this movie. Again, terrified. I'm 7 years old. And in the first scene, like that, Scream has probably one of the best opening scenes of all time in horror or any movie that I can think of.
Yeah.
But it was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying for a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Scream, I can definitely say throughout my entire life, is the movie that I've seen the most. Because it's so rewatchable.
It is.
You can't help but, now that there's way more, when you start one, you go into the others, but you always have to start with the first.
Yep.
I just love this movie so much. It influenced me on basically what horror could be.
I love that.
There was like a comedic element. Nobody can say that it's not somewhat of a comedy.
It is. No, it is. Yeah.
But it still was terrifying. That's why I think that's why it gets away with not being called a horror comedy, because of how much terror is in this movie. It is a slasher. It's I know it's not the first movie to do it, but it's the first movie that I think really made people open their eyes to what meta horror was.
Yeah.
Like Randy's scene of explaining the rules, iconic. Everybody quotes it. It's one of the most spoofed movies of all time.
Oh my God, yes.
Like this movie, I think, especially because like we always hear the 90s, it wasn't that great in horror. It was all this. And I'm like, there are some movies when I go through them, I'm like, I can see why people didn't love the 90s, especially if you're not a creature feature type person, because I think the 90s really went into creature features and sci-fi.
Monsters and sci-fi, yeah.
So if you weren't into that, if you felt that
didn't
was
have a lot.
cheesy, you weren't gonna like it.
That's
But
true.
then Scream came out right in the middle of the decade and kind of revitalized the genre.
100%. Yeah.
And I think we saw the incoming teen slashers. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend. Like, you can't help but be so influenced by this movie as a horror fan.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that it's just one of many examples of Wes Craven taking something that isn't very popular or feels like it's dying away and then bringing it back to life. Because I mean, everything he touched, he did that with. He did that with Nightmare. He did that with why am I blanking on the name of the other one that has the remake?
Last House on the Left?
Last House, thank you. Last House on the Left. Like, he really was great at making things that made people realize, like, this is still something, right? Like, it's still, Scream is one of the first horror movie franchises that I was consistently a part of the journey as they came out.
Yeah.
It's the first horror franchise that I ever was able to do that with, given my age range at the time. And it's always been one of my go-tos. And honestly, like, with the exception of this kind of like with the drama around Scream 7, like I'd always said before, I'm like, if they keep making these, I will keep going to see them, even if there's things about them that I don't like, or even if I'm not like the biggest fan of the way they handled certain things, especially in 6, I had some qualms, but, Scream is a comfort movie for me. It's like, and you talk about something that's not only influential to a bunch of us individually, it's influential, like you said, like it's so hard to not see the impact that this movie made on others in this subgenre. Like it's very clear. So Scream. I actually have a handmade Ghostface.
Oh, is that crocheted?
It is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's from Tales from the Stitch. So if you don't follow them on Twitter, highly recommend.
They're awesome.
But yeah, he's like, it's so funny because he's like facing my bed is over there. And so like we'll just be like getting ready for bed and Ghostface is just like staring at us with his knife up in the air. I love it. But yeah, no, Scream is one of my most influential as well. I will never not have extreme love and respect for that movie. So
same. And like what makes it more influential and how I know it's been such an influence on me is not that everything needs to be compared, but that's my bar for slashers and horror in general.
I get that.
I use that as my metric system of what am I looking for, especially with slashers.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I'm actually not the biggest, and you probably knew this about me already. I am not the biggest slasher fan because I don't really like people horror. I like, the monsters. I like supernatural, demonic, stuff like that. So, but this was an example of this made people scary on a very different level. And it did it consistently, I feel personally, in all the movies, even though I have my own things about the Scream 3 as well. It was still intense. It was still scary. There were still things about it that left you feeling uneasy, even after you turned the movie off or even after it was over. And so, yeah, it's such an iconic franchise in general. But the first one, I mean, and then what they did with the marketing. You've got Drew Barrymore, center, front, clip, first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, I think that shocked so many people. And I love that she was a part of it, that she liked that idea.
Yes.
I can't remember if she was the one who kind of pitched that idea or if that was already
I don't remember, but yeah, she was all on board with it for sure. Yeah.
And it did it. And I loved the impact that it had, that when they were revitalizing it with 5 and 6, they kind of mirrored the opening scene. And I love that they did it with Jenna Ortega, her career was flourishing at the time. So she was, though Melissa Barrera knocked it out of the park, but I feel like Jenna Ortega was the headliner name before it came out. Yes. And then Melissa Barrera became the headliner name. But I love that they did that because when they showed that preview, I was like, oh no, they're going to Drew Barrymore us with Jenna Ortega.
Yeah, and then
And
they
I
tricked
loved it.
us. Yeah, no, it was so good. I love that they stepped away from the over the top kind of silly intros, because by the time you get to 4, it's
Yeah.
intro within an intro within an intro, and you're like, okay, enough's enough. So they did this. You've got her messing with the knives. You've got her on the landline. You've got the pop. Like everything is like is like setting up, and you're like, well, how are they going to kill her already?
Yeah.
Because the first person we see doesn't survive the Scream
Right.
movie. Like that's just not the thing. So they did a lot of really great things with 5. I left 5. I tried to do like a quick review for social media, and you can visibly see in the video that I like did not have my shit together. I was like so speechless. I really loved it. Like I had such a great time going to see it in theaters. And so it was just like I'm like scrambling for words. I sound like an idiot. And like because I can't. I tried to do like I just saw it. Here's my reactions. But I was so consumed by it that I just couldn't get my words together to even talk about what I loved about it. So yeah, I love what else they were able to do when they came back with 5. I was very, very impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your third one is the other one that has never actually not has any of the movies in this franchise, but I don't think they have. I think this is the franchise's first time on the show. So that's gonna be Final Destination 3.
Well, I did another video before. So this is my favorite movie out of all the 2000s. From 2000 to
Okay.
2009,
It's a good one. Yeah.
this is my favorite movie because, and it became an influential movie for me. I was always a horror fan. I loved my classics. And I
Yeah.
was starting to be that person of like the snobby horror fan of,
Oh
oh,
no. Yeah.
nothing's as good as the 80s, like nothing's as good as the 70s, blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
appreciate what's coming out now. Like, oh, they just don't make horror the same. And then I saw this movie,
Yeah.
and it kind of just was mind-blowing experience of I had such a great time.
Yeah.
And immediately I'm looking back at the other Final Destinations that
Mhm.
I thought were a little corny.
Yeah.
Other movies that I was like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, let me go back. And I
Yeah.
started rewatching, and I realized I do love the 2000s horror. I do love the somewhat cheesiness, the over the
Yeah.
top. I
Yeah.
And it was Final Destination 3, and just in general, like, that movie was exhilarating to me. I saw it
Yeah.
in the theater, and I
Mhm.
just couldn't believe what I was watching, 'cause the further you get into a franchise,
Oh,
the worse the
yeah.
movies get,
Yes.
usually.
Yes.
And this one, I just remember I was like, the opening sequence is my favorite. I loved it. I am a person with certain exceptions, but I fear a lot of things that I still like to try because I like that
Okay.
adrenaline rush, and
Okay.
roller coasters is one of them.
Okay.
I am afraid that I'm gonna have a Final Destination moment on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
I see it, I'm like, I'm gonna be the one that flies off,
Yep.
and that's what happens. So
Yeah.
seeing this movie s- scared the crap out of me again, but it made me say, like, I wanna go on a roller coaster. Um,
You're
and then just
crazy.
the kills were more extreme. They
Yeah.
had really inventive kills,
It
and
did.
I
It
loved
does. Yeah.
both leads,
Mhm.
and there were so many twists in this that I was not expecting,
Yeah.
and I just remember I, like, literally left, and I'm like, "I love this movie. I need to rewatch every movie that I thought was bad because of this movie, and I need
Yeah.
to make sure that I am mistaken." And I was. I'm like,
Yeah.
2000s is one of my favorite decades now,
Yeah.
and I have to thank this movie for it, because otherwise I would have still been stuck in the, I'm too good for
Oh
horror
no.
that's coming out now.
Yeah, I mean, and I am not I'm not adventurous about pretty much anything. I have an extreme fear of falling and a fear of heights. And so I literally can't do roller coasters. I can do the ones that are low to the ground, but I can't do any that go in loops or go super high and then big drops. Like I can't. Like I will literally have a full blown panic attack. And so I felt that way before seeing this, and I also saw this in theaters. And I was just like, see, I was like, this is why I don't want to do that stuff, because no, I'm not like, and it's, I feel like the Final Destination, I have not seen all of them. I've only seen a few of them. I say that, I think I've seen the first 3 for sure. And then whatever the one is that was in 3D, the first one that was in 3D was like 5, 4.
I think it was the 4th one. And
Okay.
I will never tell someone not to do something. But I will say 1 through 3, fantastic. 3 is my favorite, followed by 1, but 1 through 3, very solid. If you stop there, I definitely understand. 5, loved it. Thought it brought it back to like the second movie
Okay.
where it's like not great, but it's really good. And there's a twist in that one that one of my favorite twists in horror.
Oh, okay. I don't think I've seen 5.
4, not gonna tell you to do something, but if you skipped that one and never watched it, you're fine.
Yeah, see, 4, so I used to work in the restaurant industry, and a group of us went out. We had some drinks, and then we went and saw 4 in theaters with the glasses and the whole 9. And I will say that it was a super fun experience, but I can see it not being something that you would necessarily want to sit through on just like your regular television and be like, oh, this is such a fun and great. I think it's experience based for the reason that I enjoyed it so much the first time, but I don't think I'm confident I have not seen 5. So I'll have to find that one and watch it at some point.
Yeah, and I think like the 3D experience is all about the experience, because I personally don't think I've ever seen a good 3D horror film.
Yeah, no, there's not, unless they're just like silly and like, or what about what's the one that I hate? Jaws. Jaws 3D. It's so bad. It's so bad. And it's even worse when you watch, when the problem I have with 3D movies is when they make them when they first go out as 3D, is that they hyper fixate on the 3D part. So then when you watch it and it's not 3D, it's awful because the effects don't translate the same when it's not in 3D. And that was like my biggest complaint about so many movies like Silent Hill 2 or Resurrection or whatever it was called, Revelation, one of the R words that they use in sequels. That was awful because it was only made for 3D. So, but seeing Final Destination 4 in 3D was just over the top silly. Like I said, it was at the end of a shift, like there had been drinks involved. Like it was just a very fun experience, but I can definitely see it not being something like you're just like randomly want to sit down and enjoy. Like that's not probably going to happen.
Yeah. And then, with back to 3, like, back to the kills, like,
oh yeah,
that is again, my influential films, a lot of them have to do with like how I view movies in comparison. So when you get these crazy movies that like to do outlandish kills, I use Final Destination 3 as a great example, and Final Destination in general, but specifically 3, because they do outlandish kills, but they do it in a way that actually makes you fear this freak accident because it still seems possible. Like the tanning bed kill.
Oh my God. That's
accidental nail guns. Like,
yeah. The tanning bed thing too, though, is like one of the best transitional scenes where it goes from the tanning beds to the coffins.
Yeah.
Where it goes from one thing to the other. I always thought I was always super impressed with that for a third, and like you said, like a third installment in a franchise where you go in with a pretty low bar of expectations.
And it's just like, I love when people go above and beyond and try to do something that hasn't been done before, but you have to stick the landing.
Agreed.
And so Final Destination 3, all those kills, I think they were so creative, so inventive, so out there, but it didn't seem like well, that's not possible at all. Like, that was dumb.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there are some movies where I look and I'm like, cool, but you lose me when I can't feel it being practical.
Yeah.
So that's like my bar for kills is Final Destination 3.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy that franchise hasn't been on here before. I'm pretty confident it hasn't been. I'm usually pretty good at remembering those. Yeah. No, that's a good shout. I do like Final Destination 3. That's probably my favorite of the ones I've seen as well. I'll have to watch 5 though. You've got me curious about what the twist is.
It's fun.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. They were not streaming as of the summertime, so I'll have to see if they are now that it's like, October is when you have more stuff coming up and streaming stuff. So maybe it'll be so. But yeah, your fourth one is the other one. That's an influential for me, which I think given what people probably know about you and me, it's probably an easy guess, which is the Blair Witch Project.
I mean, anybody who knows you, but also like everyone who now has gotten to know me through
and follows you and
other podcasts on Twitter, on social media, like the Blair Witch Project is the most influential horror movie for me. It is the reason why I am a found footage head. It is the reason why I love indie film. It is the reason why I know, or why I try to pay attention to marketing, to see who's doing what, and like, is this something new that we haven't seen before? There's just so much about this movie. Again, I was 10 years old when it came out. I didn't appreciate it as much when it first came out because it did scare me at the end, because that ending is just scary. Like, it's just terrifying.
Very scary.
But I didn't understand found footage at the age of 10. This was my first introduction to it. So it was kind of boring. And the shaky cam gets you sick. Like, 10-year-old doesn't know what to do with this information. But I was still always influenced by this movie because I was always scared of this movie because we didn't have Google to tell us that this was fake. I am one of the people who legit, until I saw them on the MTV Movie Awards, did I think that I thought this was real. I thought they were dead. I thought they were missing. I thought this was real. And it made me so scared I never liked camping to begin with, but it made me scared to go camping. Like, if ever I was invited, I'm like, no. And they're like, that was in Maryland in a really big forest.
Doesn't matter.
They're like, you're not going to get lost in this forest preserve in urban Chicago. And I'm like, you don't know that.
It's too risky.
Yes, I'm not willing to risk it. Okay, no. So it scared me until I found out. And then I was still kind of terrified because I'm like, yeah, okay, but there's the line in the movie, but I know they said like, it's impossible to get lost in the forest in the United States anymore. No, it's not. People do get lost. And
no, that's not true, especially if the conditions are just bad enough. Like,
so there's always this element of terror of being lost. And the way they portrayed that.
I totally agree.
This to me is one of the best films if you want to take a lesson in how to build tension. Because, I mean, I get the criticism for people who don't like found footage, from people who don't like older movies where they're like, no, I find it boring. I can see why people think that, but I like the undertones of movies. So that tension building from the start, you can tell that they were like just hesitant about Heather. And I'm sorry, it was because she was a woman. Like, there's so many little things in there, but
I agree.
I look at that movie and I'm like, nothing's happening, yet so much is happening.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And once they start fighting, you feel that. I have felt that with people when you're driving and you're lost and someone's just like, well, you need to go here. And then you just start yelling at each other.
Example of it in a more like everyday sense. Yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And everything in that movie was you can find an example to your everyday life.
Yeah. No, I
And
agree.
then you get to that ending because they're telling a whole story, the lore and
Yeah.
everything. And then that ending, it brings it all back, and you're
Oh,
just staring. And again, this is a perfect example of the less is more.
yes.
Subtlety is scary because what really happened in the end of this movie?
Nothing.
It wasn't a jump scare. It
It was
wasn't this carnage massacre.
nope.
It's literally a guy standing in the corner and someone freaking out about it. And it's
Yeah.
all because of the story that was laid out to us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can understand why some people don't like this movie, but I do look at it, I'm like, I understand, but I also don't. Because
I
I just look
know.
at like what I saw and was like, you didn't get moved by all these
Oh,
parts.
I know. No, I know. I did an anniversary review for this with some friends at Horror Fiend TV. And they one of the questions that they do when they do their anniversary episodes is like, does it still hold up? And two of the four of us was like, no, like it's boring. And I was like, no. No, it's not. And they're like, oh, well, like they just get on my nerves with all the bickering. I'm like, but the thing is though, is that that's reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first thing that I think people forget is that like there's tension between the characters in the first 15 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
It's not like they went from being super happy go lucky besties. That was never their dynamic. So when you take people, because I'm telling you, like, even people I love and care about, my partner, children that I love, like and you put me in that situation, and 10 out of 10, I'm going to lose my cool very quickly, because that's our natural reaction to fear of being lost. Because when you're
Yeah.
lost, there's a lot that goes into that of what happened to you. And so when people are like, oh, it's not realistic to bicker like that, I'm like, wrong. Like 100% that's realistic. Like, and then like the other thing that came up was like, oh, why is she still filming? I'm like, but she addresses that. She talks about that when she has the camera and they're giving her a hard time, and she's talking about basically breaking up like the this and the whatever they're dealing with, and it's like the only thing to focus on. It's like like she has like a couple minutes where she talks about this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. And I think like I love what you said about it being like the subtleties of it and less is more, because I think with found footage, typically, not always, but typically being lower budget indie productions, you really do have to pick and choose your moment wisely to make it scary, or to, like you said, build tension. And I feel like I've watched so many found footage movies where I'm like, this would have been so much better if you had given me less. Like if
Yeah.
you showed me the monster so much that now I just want to be friends with it. Like, like it just gets to this weird, but you never see a witch. You never see what's tormenting them or bothering them or leaving stuff outside their tents, or what's causing the hands or the laughter or the noises. You never see it. And that is the most terrifying part of the whole movie to me.
Yeah. And I was asked a question about like what makes found footage scary to you? Why do you love
Sure.
found footage? And I always say it's the one that really puts you into the movie. It blurs the lines of reality and fiction, and you feel so immersed in this movie that you're right there. And again, it could be too because we know it's not the first found footage, but we know
Right.
it still is one of the pioneers.
Yep.
So they kind of started this formula, the
Mm.
found footage formula, but you're so immersed in this movie, the way they shot it, the way they bring you into it. Because I always tell people what I love most about this movie is they had me afraid of a pile of rocks.
Right.
They made that
That's
scary. But like, because it's the storytelling that they did, and you're not paying attention to these things, but they're telling you about like, oh, the witch, she'll leave pile of rocks in front, and then we saw those pile of rocks. We didn't
And
see
then
the
it's
witch,
like, yeah.
and they just did it so well that I'm like, the witch is here. Like She did the rocks. Like,
She did
oh
that,
my
and
God.
she's messing with you because she could have taken you, like, and
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, when they wake up to find all that stuff in their campsite, they were asleep. Being asleep is the most vulnerable place you can be. You're like
Yeah.
knocked out. You don't know what's going on around you to some extent. I mean, obviously, like light sleepers or certain things are going to wake you up, but that's the scariest thing is something happening that close to you when you weren't even aware that there was something there. That is so
Yeah.
scary to me.
And then the other thing I love about this movie that I didn't realize until a year and a half ago when I went on a podcast to talk about the Blair Witch Project,
Oh, okay.
I love, love, love the character of Heather.
Yeah.
I think that we owed her an apology for so long because she was one of the most hated horror movie
She
characters, kind of
Yep.
still is to some people.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
I just went on this long tangent about like defending her and saying she actually did nothing wrong
Yeah.
because she stated from the get-go her life's mission was about this project. So
Yeah.
why is she going to turn this camera off? Why is she going to
Too
not
important. Yeah.
focus on it? Because I know they were like, well, they're going through all this and she should have just put the camera down. And when she saw the things that were happening, she, instead of wanting to go find home, she wanted to record this stuff. I was like, she tells you what she's looking for. And even though, yes, you guys are lost, you're mad, you're hungry, you're all this, but you finally found what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And now you just turn back?
Mm-mm.
No, I mean, some people will.
Some, sure.
Some people won't. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with those people to say,
Yeah.
hey, this is what we came for. Let's
Yeah.
just, we don't know where we're going. Might as well follow this trail. And I love her. I
No, me too.
adore her character, her as a person. She's an amazing person. And then shout out to all of them. I hope they get everything that they deserve and
Me
with what
too.
they're going through.
Yeah,
So,
me
but
too.
this
Yeah.
movie, it is who I am as a modern day horror
I
fan
love it. Yeah.
because I think, yeah, everybody who knows me knows that found footage is my genre. That
Yep.
is the love of my life.
Yes.
And it's all due to this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I pretty much copy and paste almost everything you said. I mean, it really is like, yeah. And I also hope that they get everything they want. I've been keeping up with that and reading articles about it. And I think it's more than well deserved at this point. And I'm really proud of them
Yeah.
that they even had what it took, to even say anything to begin with, because I can see that being a really scary position to be in. So I'm really proud of them for being like, you know what? It's been this long. Like, really, it's just not fair at this point. And they're right, it's not. So
Yeah.
I also hope that they get everything they want. But yeah, I love the Blair Witch Project. I hated Book of Shadows, which is super cliche. I really hated that one. And I actually pretty much I enjoyed the 2016. I really have like a lot of hate for that one.
I like it. It's
Yeah,
not
I
like
think it's
my
good.
favorite movie, but
No,
I
I
enjoy
think it's
it.
good. I think they did a pretty good job of taking the basics of what we got in the original Blair Witch Project and expanding on it in ways that I felt made sense, like the time thing and like how they end up in the same spot after they've been however moving or whatever that like whole thing was with like the basically that things are moving and time is running differently, that it's all very different. And then it was a little bit bigger budget, obviously, so they were able to do more effects, which I thought looked really good. I loved the ending sequence in the house at the end. I thought that was really good. Like, I was very skeptical going into it because I hated Book of Shadows. Like it's one of my least favorite movies of all time. I hate that movie. And so I go into 2016. I'm like, please, please,
Don't be Book of Shadows.
Yeah, it was like, but it didn't disappoint. I felt it was very good. I didn't hate the connection. I don't think they needed it, to be honest, but I didn't hate the connection to the original. But yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the Blair Witch Project. I really hope that they're able to get what they're asking for sure.
Yeah,
I love that.
me too.
Yeah. Yeah. So your last one that we're going to talk about is, has been on here before, I'm pretty sure. But that's Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Revenge.
Yes. So A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Again, this is something I loved it before I knew why I loved it.
Okay.
One, we're always used to the final girl.
Yep.
And in this movie, we had Jesse.
Yeah.
Who was fantastic.
Love Jesse.
He was fun. I loved everything about him. And I love that it wasn't a macho man character.
Oh, yeah.
He was screaming like in ways that the men in these movies typically don't scream.
Yeah.
He was vulnerable, and I was loving everything about that. I love that this one to me was a very vicious Freddy. He was very mean-spirited, and it kind of like was a perfect counter to the vulnerability of this young man.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with everything that happened of it being queer coded, intentionally, not intentionally, all that drama, and what it did to Mark Patton's career and life is extremely unfortunate. I'm glad he got to have his documentary and his say and everything down the line, because I do love this movie. I am a queer person, and that's why I said I loved this movie before I knew why.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
It's because it was so for me, it was queer positivity. Again, I don't know what the intentions were truly behind it, but what was put out there to many queer people was a great queer horror film.
Yeah. Kind of coming of age sort of story of finding that out or figuring that out. Yeah.
And outside of that part of it too, it's a great movie to me. It's one of my favorite installments of a very large franchise.
A very large franchise, yeah.
And I like the impact it had. And I like the conversation that it invoked regarding its queerness, how people view it, and that especially now people do get to like use this as a pioneership of queer horror and what it's meant to everyone. Like, again, I would not be who I am as a horror fan without this movie. Once it clicked.
I bet, yeah.
And I was just like, oh, no wonder. Because for the longest, before I realized that The Blair Witch Project was my favorite movie, I would constantly say this was probably my favorite horror movie for a very long time. And I explained it from a horror perspective. But when like my identity and everything clicked, then I was like, hold on, this movie. Let's watch this movie back again. And
I love that. Yeah.
Yep. There were signs.
There were signs along the way. Yeah, and you're talking about at a time frame, right, where like there wasn't a lot of queer representation in horror or anywhere, but more specifically, in this genre. And it's like, so my equivalent of that is probably like getting through season 4 or 5 of Buffy, 4 and 5 of Buffy, and like realizing that like those seasons always resonated with me deeply, and then not realizing why until much later in life. And so and The Haunting is my other one with Theo and Nell, and like that just was like there was something about that movie that I've always loved, and it took me many, many, many years to realize that was why it felt so comfortable for me. And it was because you're seeing, as a younger person, a positive representation of something you haven't quite been able to get to on your own yet, whether it's saying it out loud, telling people, or realizing it yourself, whatever the case may be. And I love that. I'm with you on what it did for him. That part is hard, but I think that it's cool that, like you said, now people can look at this movie and it's meaningful to them in that way. And it's not a negative thing, at least not for most people. I can't say nobody would watch this and be like super offended, because I'm sure that exists, right? But I love that now it's getting this overall like positive things. And I got to tell you, for a sequel to a horror movie like Nightmare on Elm Street, it's got to be one of the best in the genre, because it's just such it's scary, it's engaging, you care about Jesse like immensely, like you're invested in the story, you're watching for these little things that are happening, and it's very it's just such an incredibly strong sequel. the likes of which are very few and far between.
Yeah, and it's I'm a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street, the whole franchise,
Okay,
even
yeah,
the silly ones, and the not so great ones. But I look at it and because I look back and I'm like, yeah, some of them are a little tougher to get through because I feel like they lost what originally made these movies great. Because I know people love the personality of Freddy Krueger, and
yes,
that's all fine and well.
yes,
He is a very charismatic killer, but I think the best Freddys were 1,
yeah,
2, and New Nightmare.
yeah,
Because once we got into the quippy little phrases,
yeah.
that Freddy was cool, but the movies felt like they were making the movies just to center around these one-liners.
I agree with that. Yeah,
And
yeah,
you lose there's still a plot to them, but you lose the consistent plot, the
yeah.
strong plot, like
It
where
was
I feel
really,
one is one of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen.
yeah,
Two was an extremely strong sequel, still scary, a little quippy, but for the most part, I
yeah,
loved so much of that one.
yeah.
And I do love Dream Warriors.
Oh, I
I think
love
Dream
Dream Warriors. That's my
Warriors is
favorite one.
so great. And I
So
think they did
fun.
a great job making him have his personality be silly. But I feel like once they got the reaction from the crowd of, oh, welcome to prime time,
Yeah,
uh, people were like, that's the Freddy we want. And the
and that's
studios were
what they
like, well,
started.
that's what you're going to get. And we're going to force feed it to you. It's not
Yeah,
going to be
yeah,
intentional and fun. It's just going to be,
in your face.
yeah, over and over and over.
Totally
And
agree.
that's where I'm like, yeah, I start to lose a little. I used to rewatch all of them. And then
Yeah.
now I look back, I'm like, yeah, I can skip a few of these now. Not gonna lie, I can skip a few of these.
Yeah.
But no, two, again, and even outside of the queerness part of it, but just Jesse, because I know some people still will die on the hill of it wasn't queer coded. There was nothing queer about this film. And I'm like, I don't know what you saw, but okay, we'll even just take that. The positive outlook that I get from the movie of Jesse was, again, he was not your typical male horror figure.
Nope.
He was, I wouldn't say feminine, but he
No.
wasn't masculine.
Just not that overcompensating, like just over the top with that archetype of the male lead and
Yeah.
what it was for that time. No, you're
And
absolutely right.
I feel like that makes it comfortable for men who aren't in the macho man role to still feel like, hey, look at this guy. Like, look at
Yeah.
this person. And again,
Yeah.
I didn't start to see these types of things in movies, which I'm glad I'm part. Like, I still can enjoy certain movies that I'm like, okay, problematic too slightly, as long as it's not like really, really bad.
Sure,
But
sure.
you can overlook some little things. But
Yeah.
this is a movie that made me think more like deeply about horror and oh, what does this mean to other people? What does representation truly mean in the world of horror? And I think this was a good spot of it. And obviously there's other representation that is still needed in horror,
God,
but
yes.
when
Yeah,
it
yeah.
comes to a movie that came out in the late 80s or early 90s,
Yeah.
this is a movie that again, whether they meant to or not, they created a very positive queer film.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
And I can only thank them for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's a great film. Regardless, I guess, of what you get out of it in that regard. If you know,
Yeah.
if you think that it's not, that's fine, I guess. But for most of us, I think it was. And so
Yeah.
yeah.
I just don't know how you can see all the different relationships in this movie and be like, yeah, this is straight. Like, okay,
Yeah,
that's
right.
fine.
No, I
Whatever works
totally
for
get
you.
it. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, yeah. So that was your five. We did The Omen, Scream, Final Destination 3, The Blair Witch Project, and Nightmare 2, Freddy's Revenge. And as always, Mike's links where you can find him will be in the description for this episode. So go follow him, especially if you like found footage. But even if you don't, go follow him anyway.
Thank you.
And yeah, well, thank you again for coming on. This was so much fun talking to you about your movies.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. When you asked me, I was like so excited because again, I think we just kind of started interacting not too long ago.
Yeah, not too long
And
ago.
I'm like just so involved with this show. Like I love watching it. Everything about you guys, I love following all the ventures that you
Aw.
guys are leading into. I'm just having a great time going through the extensive catalog of videos you guys have. Like I love it.
Yeah.
FYI, my favorite thing is how organized your YouTube channel is with the playlists. So it's like I love this person needs organization.
That's my OCD. I go to YouTube channels that don't have playlists, and I'm like ready to pull my hair out. I'm like, I can't do it.
Because I'm especially like because I started with you guys telling me that you had Found Footage Fridays,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, okay. And then I saw that you guys had like a lot of videos, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be hard trying to find all these ones. And then I was like, what's playlist? And then I saw the Found Footage one. I'm like, oh, this is so good. It's just in an order. Like that's my favorite thing. Whether it's OCD for me too, I don't know, but I love lists.
Yeah, I want people to be able to get to the stuff because not everything we talk about is going to be of interest to absolutely everyone. I mean, there are people who are big horror fans but hate found footage. So,
Oh yeah.
so I think it's. I was always given the advice early on that playlists make it easier for people to get to the stuff they want to get to.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that it worked because it's and like you said, there are so many videos. 3 years in, it's just so many. So. Yeah, but it's been great interacting with you. We were talking earlier about some found footage movies and laughing about like my takes and your takes and and it's always cool to meet somebody that is so willing to share a difference of opinion and still have like a really fun conversation because as you know, that is not always the case.
No,
So,
and I just find that so weird. Like
I know.
I just usually find it a little narcissistic of people when they're that mad over an opinion because it's like, so is that you just thinking that your opinion is superior?
Yeah,
Because why are you this upset about that I think something different?
Yeah, no. And you'll see people bait me, like my friends on the internet will bait me with stuff that they know. Like if you ever see me post about something and then you see randomly like a Creep gif from the movie Creep, but it doesn't have anything to do with the post, it's because they know I hate that movie.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this fun kind of banter back and forth situation of like, I hate you for putting that stupid gift, but it's become like a fun thing. And we really just don't welcome the people who are opposite of that because that's just not our belief system around it. I guess if you want to call it that, like this is a safe space to talk about horror. It's not a debate team. It's not, who can be the best arguer or and it's all matter of opinions. And sometimes when you talk to other people about their opinion that is different than yours, you gain different perspectives. And I've had conversations about movies I hated and my mind has been changed because someone saw something in the film that I had never thought about or I didn't recognize or I missed or whatever. And so, yeah, we welcome all of that stuff. We don't have to agree. We just have to be nice to each other. That's
exactly. Because perfect example, I still haven't watched it yet because I do know I have to set myself up for it. But well, what I love too is like I started watching you guys, and you and I have a lot of similar opinions on certain movies. Of like the Blair Witch Project is our favorite, but even like we find fun in the Dinosaur Project.
Yes.
But then there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, I love people horror. Yeah. I love people horror. Yeah. So the first time when I was just like, oh my God, when you're like, oh, when you rated Creep, I was like, but then once I started watching more, I was like, I know what she likes more.
Yeah.
I know this isn't for her.
It's a pattern.
That's why like when you ask for like movie recs, I'm like, okay, not gonna go in my brain. Like, let me shuffle through and see some other ones. But what I liked was Skinamarink. That is not a movie for me.
Yeah.
But hearing your perspective when we started talking about it, that really made me think of like, okay, let me rewatch this with your perspective in
Yeah.
mind. Because other people, I have a few people who really love that movie, and it's a similar opinion to yours, but still different. It's like a fear that they've had of being a child, being alone, stuff like that.
Yeah. Right.
I have my own things with my childhood, but I was like, I'd never put myself in that place with this movie.
Yeah.
So I still don't think it will be for me, but I
Yeah.
think I don't think I will hate it the way that I currently do. I
Right.
think I'll just be like, this isn't for me.
It
But now
doesn't.
I can see why people love this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and with Skinamarink in particular, I do think very highly of that movie, and I always say, when I watched it, it both it both hurt and healed my inner
Yeah.
child in ways that I was not. I had to take breaks, when I was watching it. And I always tell people when they talk about, like, I know a lot of people that don't like that movie and really hated it and had very strong negative opinions about it. And my response is like, well, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that you didn't have the same
Yeah.
experience that I did, because the truth is that my experience was upsetting.
Yeah.
And it was upsetting in a way that I was not prepared to be going into that film, and I'm like, okay, experimental horror, which I usually don't even like, which is the crazy part. And I will tell you, like, my love for it has only grown because I've watched a lot of interviews with the writer and the director of it, and I watched his interviews and I listened to him talk about the experience of working on the film and all he did and working with the kids, and it just created so much more respect. And a lot of people, I think, do this with films where they already really enjoyed a film, but when you get to know the people that worked on the project and you basically come to care about them too, then it like
Yeah.
it amplifies what you feel for the movie. And so, yeah, I have so much love for that movie. And I know people are really mad that it won a chainsaw, but I am not. I'm like, yes.
I looked and I was just like, okay. But again, but I also wasn't like surprised because I
Yeah,
think too, even though like I know a lot of people who hate it, but I
I do
also know
too.
people who think it's one of the best, freshest types of
Okay.
horror to
I don't
come
understand
out.
those.
And so when it came out, it was so divisive. I'd
It
never heard
really,
someone
it
say
was.
like it was fine. I've never heard someone say it was fine. I've only
Nope.
heard it's the
One
worst
or
thing
the
to
other.
ever exist, or it's really, really amazing. It's the best thing.
I know.
So
It's polarizing.
I'm not surprised that it won
Yeah. I
because it
just love
was
it.
whether you liked it or not, it was the
I will
most talked about movie.
I will tell you this though, Mike, I will never watch it again.
There
I
are
will
movies like
never
that.
I will never revisit it. If I do, it'll be 10 years from now when I've completely forgotten the whole thing. And I just want to be like, let me just touch base with this again. But it is, to me, it has no rewatch value, like none, because of what it made me feel and the things that I had to sit with. And I watched it on a weekend where at the time my partner and I weren't living together when this came out, because it's been a while. And so my son goes to his dad's house every other weekend, and it just so happened to be like the weekend he wasn't there. And so when I have problems with my childhood that resurface, I cope with it by like doting on my child. Like, it makes me, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I couldn't even do that. And I'm like, I gotta find something else to do. And then I gotta pause it. I gotta walk around. I gotta go outside. I gotta do something. And so it was, yeah, I love that movie though. And I get it. It was polarizing. Like, the differences that it created in the community were bananas. But
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons we kind of, Tom and I on that one kind of went back and forth about whether or not it is or isn't found footage. And I was like, I think it's found footage enough and it's really popular right now and there's a lot of discussion. I think we need to cover it. And so we
Yeah.
did. And that was, that was kind of where that whole thing came from, because he was just like, ugh.
Yeah, there's certain movies that I'm like, because there's different. I always say there's, and you guys touch on the subgenres and stuff.
Subgenre.
But like mockumentaries, that's why I love the term in-world camera, because it encompasses like all the
I love
different
that.
styles of found footage
Yeah.
without. Because when I say like, oh, it's found footage, but I'm like, it's really not. It's a mockumentary. But
It's,
so
yeah,
many
it's
people.
like, yeah.
So many people go that way, but Skinamarink to me was in that realm because it was so analog, and from the point of view that it was from, I was like, you can't say that this is just a regular horror movie.
Hell no.
The perspective it's from is so out there that you have to say it's within this subgenre of horror.
Yeah.
So to me, even though it's not my favorite, it is 100% found footage, and I don't think anybody should say that it's not.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Well, cool. This was fun. We'll find some other reasons for you to come on and talk about all kinds of things. I really did have a great time talking with you. So I'm glad we're able to make it work. Yeah. Again, if you are not following Mike and Serial, please do. Links are going to be in the description. Super easy. Just click and go. It's really easy. You won't regret it. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us on this episode. We hope you have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you in the next one.
Bye.